Right, hello everybody. It's really great to see so many people coming. We're at the end of National Adoption Week. We've had events on every day. This is the final of our online events, and lots of people have turned up, which is just great. And today we're going to be talking about intermediary work and contact and the new project FamilyConnect and the funding through that and the complexities of intermediary. It's such a small word. Well, actually, it's quite a long word to encompass such a huge kind of event. There's a quote of the comedian Stuart Lee's, who was adopted, that I really like. He talked about the social weightlessness of adoption. And for adopted people, it feels like you are sort of picked up and plonked down somewhere else. The impacts on all those people involved in it, whether or not it's the birth family, adoptive family, all the rest of it, are actually absolutely huge. And adopted people end up in a completely different place. Some of them are across boundaries of class, some of them across boundaries of ethnicity, but all of them in a new place, mostly feeling a little bit displaced. So we're going to be talking today about how, when people are adults, that is put back together, the funding situation, the emotions involved in it, and so yeah, what does FamilyConnect and intermediary look like is on the agenda, why people think it's important from different perspectives, and we're going to be using video clips as well of adopted people and birth parents to show some of that. And we're going to be talking about reunions, which is such an emotionally charged thing, and how we can be funded better and work better. So that's all in 50 minutes. So this is going to be a bit of a whistle stop. My colleague Emma is on the chat. Please feel free to put things in that. If we have any time at the end, we will try and answer questions, but my suspicion is that probably won't happen. But that doesn't mean your comments in the chat won't be read. So now I'd just like to move on to us introducing ourselves. So I'm with Jenny and Sharon. So Jenny, first off, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sure, thank you, Mike. Hello, everybody. I'm a relatively newbie to PAC. That means I've been involved with them for a couple of years. And I'm also a birth mother who has had a reunion. But I won't say too much about that because that's more of the story to come. My background's in psychology and in learning and education from school up to university. And I've always been particularly interested in emotional development and the impact of learning on that and the impact of all sorts of experiences on that. So I shall enjoy sharing some of that with you later.
Great, thanks, Jenny. It's great to have you here. Sharon.
Hi, my name's Sharon Lake and I am the lead intermediary in the private intermediary service. So I work alongside a team of probably 12 other intermediaries. My background is in social care, so I have been a social worker across children's services for the past 24 years, working in adoption from different angles. So working with families where children are removed, working with children where we're preparing them for adoption, working with foster carers and assessing and preparing adoptive families. My current role is working with adults who have been impacted by adoption and want to think about, learning about the history, getting some information, thinking about reunification or reunions in whatever form that might take.
Great, thanks, Sharon. It's great to have you here, and in fact, great to have you in the organisation. You rather saved my life because we didn't have a manager for FamilyConnect, and Sharon came along, so I'm very happy about that. And and I'm Mike Hancock. I'm National Strategic Lead at PAC-UK, and I came into working with adoption through my own intermediary service. Actually, I went to After Adoption Yorkshire back in the late 90s. And After Adoption Yorkshire was a precursor of PAC UK, so it's part of the organisation, but has since merged with it. And I'd on and off I'd searched for my birth mother, but it was quite difficult in those days, pre-computers, so it had taken rather a long time. But by my mid-30s, I was spurred on to do that, and I had a reunion helped by them back in about 1998, and then went on to have a relationship with my birth family. And at that time, I worked in something completely different and came and started working with them around 15 years ago, I think it was. So, so I've worked in intermediary and other aspects, and now I'm the National Strategic Lead. So that's us. So that's our little panel today. So we've got some lived experience, we've got professional experience, and hopefully that'll add up to a really good event. Now I'm going to start off, we're going to be explaining about the FamilyConnect project, because this is important today for us. And I just want to give a bit of background about how this came about around historic adoption and the JCHR report. So obviously, over the years, the disquiet around historic adoption has grown, and it's become quite clear to a lot of people that when we talk about relinquishing birth mothers and consent, that there was a lot less relinquishment and consent going on than was first pretended, if you like. And actually, a lot of often young women, but not exclusively, had their children removed because they weren't married. And they had an enormous amount of pressure put on them to do that. So there was family pressure, there was the shame of having a child outside wedlock, and there was economic pressure as well. Young women at that time, and often today, actually don't have a great deal of economic clout, and it's difficult. It was difficult at that time for them to bring up children themselves. And there was also religious pressure, and the church was heavily involved in terms of a lot of the adoptions were through church, moral societies, etc. And someone put it to me once, a really interesting sort of idea I hadn't really thought of, which was very much that in the 60s started to swing, and people were having relationships more freely. But if you got caught pregnant and you were a young woman, it wasn't swinging so much, and you got home and there was no end of trouble. So, and women went to mother and baby homes, and there was an awful lot of shame around this. So this led to a long demand for a state apology, which was led by birth mothers and then by adopted people too. And hats off to them, because what that led to was the JCHR report, the Joint Committee of Human Rights report, which was a parliamentary report chaired by Harriet Harman, which sat between 2021 and 22. And many birth mothers and adopted people and other people involved in this gave very powerful testimony to this committee. What was also crucial, as well as the lived experience, was the statements around state involvement in adoption. And Michael Lambert of Lancaster Uni, who we did an event with last year, was really crucial in tracing the line of responsibility, if you like, from government to individual decisions, which was really good. And when the JCHR reported, they decided that there was a violation of family life had taken place for those people. Now that led to apologies and responses in terms of services in Wales and in Scotland. However, in the UK, the English UK government, if you like, declined to do that, and no immediate sort of answer was forthcoming, really. Even though ourselves, and I'm sure other organisations, put forward some very good ideas to them about how they might right some of the wrongs of this. And so really FamilyConnect came out of that situation. It was really about trying to find a solution to this, which was going to be affordable for a government which didn't want to spend any money, and was practical and easily done. So with Adoption England, we began an 18-month pilot for a single point of access, which is the FamilyConnect website, and which my colleague will put into the chat. And to attach to that, there was also some funding for adoptions which were affected by the pre-76 period, because that was the period of the JCHR report. Doesn't mean that intermediary services aren't needed for the later cohort of people who were affected by adoption, but that's what the funding suggests. We've expanded the website. There's an adopted area. There is also a care leavers area, which were primarily set up to allow adopted people and care leavers to access their records. But that's got lots of interesting information about intermediary. It's become an access point for those intermediary services. And with the funding, we have attached an advice line to that, which again will be in the chat, which allows people to ring up and talk to some really experienced people, like Jenny, in fact, on the advice line and get some advice about their particular circumstances, and also about if they are eligible for any funding. So what I'd like to do now is just turn to Sharon, if that's okay, because she's going to talk a bit more about the practicalities of that service. And then we're going to be coming on to what's intermediary like. So if you like, we're leading into the more emotional aspects of this of today. Go ahead, Sharon.
Thanks, Mike. So the FamilyConnect service, if we start with the website, because that does seem to be a huge source of information for lots of people. So there are the 4 different tiles that Mike has mentioned, the 2 for the care leavers and adopted adults. There is also a tile for birth parents, which has got lots of information for birth parents who would like to find out about what is available to them, what the support looks like. And another one that's in development is a tile which will give information to professionals who kind of want to find out about different aspects of the services around and that are available for adults who are impacted by adoption. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our advice line. So the FamilyConnect advice line sort of launched itself at the beginning of this pilot project, which was in March 2024, and we have people staffing the advice line across 3 days of the week. So there's 2 3-hour slots and then a 6-hour slot on a Thursday that captures some time in the evening for people who need to to speak with us outside of normal kind of office hours. We were looking at kind of the information, the data earlier in the week, and one of the things that stood out for me was that in the period between March and October of this year, the advice line had dealt with over 400 contacts, whether those were emails or telephone calls or messages that were left where people wanted communication back. And that was from a range of people who might be adopted adults seeking information about how to find their birth records, might be people seeking information about where or how to find original birth certificates, people who just needed some understanding, some support to understand kind of the legal process around the possibility of search and reunion, and people who just kind of wanted to talk about whether or not it was even possible. So our advice line, as Mike has kindly said, is staffed by 6 really experienced intermediaries. I can see that there's a couple of them on the call actually, who bring with them such a deep knowledge of adoption regulations, but also an understanding of the impact that adoption can have for people across their lifetimes. They are an incredibly knowledgeable and generous bunch, and when I find myself at a loss, although I don't ring the advice line, I definitely know who I need to ask about questions when I'm not sure. So at the end, we will put a slide up that just gives you some contact information about the advice line, the telephone number, the opening hours, and the email address for anyone who might have an interest in that. The main part of our project is around providing funded intermediary services for adults impacted by adoption. So the people that we the criteria for that funding as set out by Adoption England, as Mike has said, are adoptions that took place before 1976. So the majority of our work covers work with adopted adults and direct relatives. So that might be birth parents or birth siblings. And we've actually had a really quite busy year since launching in March of this year. So since the project went live, we have been inviting people to express an interest in receiving an intermediary service. And that expression of interest is a form that is accessed through the FamilyConnect website. It's literally on the front page, on the page to do with kind of a FamilyConnect, and you tap on and it takes you through to a little form that you fill in that gives us some very basic information. So since going live, we've had over 400 expressions of interest. That's people who have wanted to begin to think about the process of, of an intermediary service, what that might look like for them and how that might work. Of those expressions of interest, round about 60% of those have come from adopted adults who want to seek out either a birth parent or are aware of other relatives and family members that they might want to learn more about. The expressions of interest that have come in from birth parents have been at a much lower rate. And so it's about 10% of all of our expressions of interest that have come from birth parents, but we're still very interested in hearing from that group, particularly as it relates to the JCHR cohort, because we would really like to start to work with people who may not have had an understanding that this was something that was available to them. What we know is that not all of those expressions of interest convert into full applications, because for some people, the timing just isn't right. And so they might just make that first expression and then stand back a bit. Our staff on the advice line have started just kind of gently reaching out to people who might have made that first expression but not followed up, just to see if there's anything more we can do to draw them into the service and to help them to access an intermediary service while it is available to them. Another big part of the work that we do is we work alongside a number of other intermediary services so that people have choice. It's not just about coming to PAC-UK. If they already have a working relationship or if they have an understanding of how another intermediary service works, then we welcome them to make contact with that intermediary service, and then that intermediary services contacts us to access the funding. So this is not just about channeling work to PAC-UK. This is about making the intermediary service available to everyone, really. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop there.
Great, thanks, Sharon. And talking about availability, let's just talk very briefly about funding. I mean, other than this pot of money that we've got, which we're really pleased about, funding around intermediary, I've got to say, is absolutely dire. It used to be much better than this. Most people would have been able to get a funded intermediary service, but the fact is that because it's not a statutory service, so it's not required by government, it is that funding has disappeared, except if you live in a very few lucky areas in Britain. So people are having to pay between, depending on which service they go to, between £600–700 to £2,000 to get an intermediary service. And obviously, this funding is aimed at that historic generation. There are plenty of people coming out of adoptions now, and there is no service for them to be reunited with the families that they were separated with by the state. And I've got to say, I just think that's dire. So that's a personal opinion, but it's one that we will push. And it's also one that I think that this funding is important for, and this is why we are asking people to fill in these expressions of interest forms if they're interested in intermediary, because at the end of the pilot we will be able to go back to government and say, look, there is a real need here of people, because otherwise people end up on social media or DNA testing and all the rest of it, and we know that that can lead to a much greater chance of an intermediary service failing, of an approach failing, because people are contacted in a rather scary way if they're immediately contacted on social media and that kind of thing. So that's my little plug for funding. Now, I just wanted to move on to why this is important. Why do people want an intermediary service? I mean, I come from the blank sheet generation, supposedly. We were just shifted family and adopted, and nothing was supposed to be felt or told until that crucial law change 75–76. Then people were told that we would never know our details, kind of thing. So now we know that isn't true. So Jenny's going to talk in a minute about the birth parent perspective, but let's just hear about the adoptee perspective a bit more, about why people want this service. So Jen, if you could just put on that first video. They're talking about identity here, some adopted people. Here we go.
I think identity is the biggest thing for an adopted child. I had no sense of identity. I didn't understand who I was. And I think that's because my birth family wasn't talked about. We didn't talk about my Caribbean heritage. It was just never discussed. Perhaps if it was, then I wouldn't have had as many issues as I did.
For me, growing up as an adopted person, I found it very hard because identity was a big issue for me. I didn't know my background story, so it was difficult to place life events and how they link back to my history.
You're going through life not knowing who you are, feeling like a leaf on the breeze because you don't know who you look like, who you resemble.
I know non-adoptive people don't experience this because your face is your face, but when you've not known where your eyes are from, where your nose is from, it's just had a profound impact on me.
At the age of 16, I finally got a chance to see my original birth certificate. It was then like a light bulb moment where, now I can understand something about myself. Now this makes sense why I was feeling the way I was feeling as a child, that there was a sense of loss. There was a sense of something missing. There was a sense of something wasn't quite right, but no one was talking about it.
I found my teenage years very difficult, not knowing who I am. My birthdays, the nights before my birthdays, felt terrible because although my adoptive family made a big deal, got lots of presents, there was a sense that there was something missing. No one around me was there at my birth. It was a very confusing time because I still didn't have the opportunity to talk about it.
I think the major thing that was missing for me was not seeing anybody who looked like me. So I grew up in a white world, and I think it's so important if a child is adopted into a family that doesn't match its ethnicity, it's so important that the parents understand how important their identity is.
Great, thanks, Jin. Just to back this up, we did some research with a big consult of 450 adopted people a couple of years ago, and that was adopted people from across the ages, and only 13% said they had enough information under 18 to have a sense of their own identity, and that percentage was still very high in modern adoption. And I can only underline that from my own experience. It just is a void, really. And of those 450 people, 85% had attempted to have contact with their birth families since reaching 18. Now, I must underline, it's not for everybody. People can choose not to do this, and that's absolutely their right and choice, and there's nothing strange about that. But there's also nothing strange about wanting to find out about who you are, really. Just while we're on a very quick stat, 3 stats for you. 77% of adopted people said that the birth family member they contacted responded positively to their initial approach. 77% had a positive response. So that's really good and ought to be really heartening for adopted people listening. 92% of adopted people said they were glad that they attempted contacts, which is also really good. And 59% maintain a relationship with their birth relative. So I think that's really heartening. And most of those people had received an intermediary service rather than having just done it themselves. Anyway, that's a bit on the adoptee perspective. And I just want to hand over to Jenny now, just to reflect on what brought her to want intermediary and her experience of it. So over to you, Jenny.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Well, all the different little bits of explanation from both Mike and Sharon leading up to this point that could have been talking about me. My experience was when I was pregnant with my first son. As a teenager, as someone about to go to college, that I had shamed the family. I was to be hidden away until it was, and I quote, all over, as if it was all over. And he and my child would be adopted. End of story. Nice and tidy. Nothing else to say. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Get on with the rest of your life. If only it had been that easy. What happens? And I would again link back to the points that Mike made. The historic adoption process was cruel. pretty much. And we've lived with that legacy. I call it a shadow legacy of, to some extent, cruelty and to some extent trauma. Again, you learn to live with it. You put it in the backpack and you carry on. And there was a lot of years of prevarication in terms of what I should do about that son that I gave up. Certainly, as far as the older members of my family were concerned, that was it. So there was no permission. There was no permission to talk. There was no permission to be sad. There was no permission to share any feelings about his birthday. Nothing. I carried around in my purse a little slip of paper with the NORCAP details. And I did that for probably 40 years because I couldn't ever quite pluck up the courage. I didn't think, to be honest, and I'll be honest about this, that I was good enough to reach out to him because of what I had been left with in terms of the emotional shadow legacy. So actually it took closure in terms of the loss of a member of my family, of the older generation, before I could unlock that door and move on. So I then looked up NORCAP and then realised that PAC had taken them over. So I made a phone call, exactly as Mike and Sharon have talked about. I made that initial phone call. I had no idea what I was asking, but I knew I wanted to try and find some sort of resolution to those years of pain and sort of neglecting that part of my history. So my initial experience of PAC was that it was like opening a window and letting the sun shine in. Onto a part of my life which had hitherto been in shadow and sometimes complete darkness. I have to say I was also supported by my husband and children and friends and everybody once I felt able to talk, because for so long you learn to hide it. From that generation, you learn to hide things, you learn to ignore them. So I spoke to PAC. I was paired up with a wonderful intermediary. And I have to be careful that I don't start crying, because the first thing she said was, "Tell me your story." And that's the first time I'd ever been able to tell my story. And I think we were on the phone for about an hour and a half. But I shared my story. I named what I needed to name, and I acknowledged what was previously hidden. So this was in actually 2021, and the adoption experience for me had been in the very late 60s. So you know that was a long time to try and unpack. Anyway, there was a really useful and good and much appreciated what I call hand-holding with my intermediary. She just shared my journey with me when there was no news or when there was some news. And later that year, my son was found, he was contacted, and there was a reunion, which I'll talk about later. But as a result of that, and a result of our shared experiences, my intermediary said to me that she had been quite moved, and she felt that I had a degree of emotional intelligence and understanding about the processes that enabled me to manage it all, because it was hugely emotional. And it's true, she was hugely helpful too, I have to say. So the following, forgive me, I can't remember exact timings, but I went through a process. I was invited to apply to join the intermediary team. Went through quite a rigorous process in terms of being interviewed and vetted and etc. And it led to me joining the intermediary team, I think, about a year and a half or so ago, I can't remember exactly. And since then, I've had a caseload of clients. I've been able to bring my experiences to holding their hands on the journey. Each of the clients is making their own personal journey towards possible reconnection in some way. And I'll talk more about that later.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Which leads us into Sharon talking with you about the what an intermediary service looks like. For those who work in adoption, I know there will be some of you and younger people as well. We're going to be talking after that about contemporary adoption. So anyway, Sharon, take us away on the intermediary service.
I just wanted to say thank you to Jenny, really, for being so candid in sharing your story. I'd not heard that before. And as you were speaking, the thing that struck me was the opposite perspective than the one that I've had. And so as an intermediary, the work for me is very much around allowing people that space and a recognition that for, in particular, birth parents, they may never have told that story before because they had not been given permission to do that. And just how powerful that feels to be sitting in my chair and having that conversation with people. So to hear, how that felt for you as well is really kind of really positive and affirming of the work that we do. Given, Jenny, that you have the two hats, I only have the one. So what I would say is, in terms of kind of the role of the intermediary, I think that quite a lot of our work is that holding space and giving people permission, but also giving people an understanding of the range of different paths that we might take in terms of, what it is that people want from a service, and whether a full kind of reunion and reunification is the only possible outcome. What's your experience of working, sitting in the intermediary chair now? What's your experience of, what are the key things that you think you do in that role?
Well, I suppose I was spoilt in a way with my own reunion with my son, because that went so well, and that would have been definitely a good news story for the intermediary team. But so I had to be careful, because obviously that can flavour your own that colour your own expectations as to what might happen with the client group you're working with. And I certainly found out within the first few months of working that each journey is so different. You can have no expectations. You have to be right there in the moment with the client, with the person who needs to be supported, to give them a chance to, as you say, explore what they may or may not want, but also to introduce to them the potential for so many different ways of resolving the reconnection, or not, because as you say, sometimes it doesn't happen, but sometimes there are other ways. And that's the other thing I wanted to say. Through working with the client group, I've discovered that you can have resolution not just with the magic bells and whistles and rainbows and unicorns, let off the fireworks type one, but there can be some very, very quiet and careful unpicking and unpacking and understanding where somebody is, where both parties are in that reunion or not, with a reconnection. I hesitate to use the word reunion because that isn't always the case, but there can be a reconnection, or there can just be a resolution. And that's a resolution. Certainly I've discovered that with clients, sometimes a resolution in terms of their own emotions. And it's being able to let some things go and feeling more okay about what's happening in whatever way it is or isn't happening. And to me, that's a vital space to hold with the
Thank you.
client.
I think You're right, Jenny. Thank you. The thing I would add is that sometimes it's about managing people. No, always it's about managing people's expectations. Sometimes it's about managing, pacing the work so that actually helping people to understand that we do have to work at the pace of the most cautious party. And that might be frustrating, and it's about helping people to hold that uncertainty and to kind of take it incrementally.
Because the person who's being reached out to could be in any, that their lives could be at any particular point, and at that very point of being contacted, there could be all sorts of things going on with them. They may not be. They're probably a lot of them aren't as likely to be as ready as the person with whom we're working. So it's a much more of a bolt from the blue, and some people adjust to that very quickly, and some people need time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'm just going to finish up by saying, on a practical level, we work with a very tiny team of genealogists and researchers who kind of, using the information that people often have in their adoption files, tracking through public records, the electoral roll, things like that, are able to connect the information that we've got from people's early lives with the people that are named as parents or relatives. We increasingly, and this is, I really struggle with this, is that something that's been, that we can see as a very helpful tool, but one that makes me uncomfortable, is the use of social media. Sometimes that can be used to confirm information rather than our main port of call. But I think we have to recognise that increasingly, and particularly as we start to think about more contemporary adoptions, that is a tool that can be used for good, as well as the challenges that it might create. I'm conscious of the time, Mike. I am going to throw back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks
about
both so much. I just
adoption.
wanted to add one thing, that once we are working with people and then we send out a letter on their behalf, I mean, from my own personal experience, I remember that period as being the most vulnerable I ever remember feeling, just about, because I was making an offer of an approach to someone who had given me up for adoption, and actually she didn't want to see me to start with, or luckily my sister did, and it was a really difficult period. And I think it's exactly the same for birth parents, reaching out to their children, their adopted children, thinking, what are they going to think of me? And so a lot of what the intermediary is doing is just supporting people through that extremely vulnerable time, I think. So, but Jenny, I can only echo what people are saying in the chat. Thanks so much for sharing that personal experience, and thanks, Sharon. That was great. As I say, we obviously, both Jenny and I were the result of historic adoption, I suppose one might say, but this is still obviously happening now. People still need intermediary services. So contemporary adoption clearly has different reasons, often, not always, for the reasons for the adoption. Usually some kind of neglect or abuse and removal through the courts has taken place. But some of the fundamental emotions going on are the same for both the birth parents and the adoptees. It can be more complex. It can be, there can be more risk involved and that kind of thing. But still, it bears a very close resemblance to a lot of what we're talking about. I just want to ask Jin now to play a little video of, we've got some young adopted people talking here about their feelings about this.
When I was like 16, I knew it was only like 2 years until I could find her. And then, because when I was younger, I always wanted to find her. And then it went to, I didn't want to. Because like, what if I turned up and she just says, like, well, I got rid of you for a reason. Like, what if she didn't want to be found?
Meeting my birth family, coming up to 18, it was something I felt quite strongly about that I did want to do. But my therapist said to me that because I'm in college and I'm going through like my GCSEs and things like that, that I probably shouldn't do it at that point. I've got 3 half-brothers and 1 half-sister that I know of. There could be more, but I don't know. I've not met them. I want to, it's just finding the right time and doing it with the right person.
I knew what had happened. I always knew that I was hurt and that's why I was taken away, but no, it was nothing more complicated than me just wanting to put a face to a name.
You read that file for the first time, it's pure anger. You read it for a second time, still pure anger. You read it for the fifth time, still pure anger. Thanks, Jim. I find it very moving watching the vulnerability of those young people and their lack of well, not lack of, but just confusion. I mean, in a really real way, you know, and who wouldn't be at that stage in a life which has had a lot of difficulty in it. So I really feel that those young people need that support too. We'd like to also play you a clip, if that's okay, Jean, of some contemporary, so I hate this phrase, contemporary birth mothers, so modern birth mothers, also talking about the prospect of finding their children.
If they come looking for you, you have to learn who they are when they're grown-ups. So these letters are really important for us to get to know them, so we feel like we know them if they ever do come looking for us, so it's not awkward.
I would hope in time when and if he decides he would like to meet me in person, that the adopters, they'd be open to working with me to mediate reunification if that is what he would like.
Most of the parents I would work with, they would absolutely love to be part of that process should it be the right time, and they would love to work with adopters to try and make that process as positive as it can be.
I think one thing we do have in common is that we both care about our child, and I think there is a potential to have quite an open relationship somewhere down the line that will benefit not only us and them but also the child, as research shows that adopted children that know about their birth family, where there is a degree of openness, fare much better than adopted children that don't.
Hopefully by the time she decides that she wants to meet me, that they've already laid out a good sort of foundation of who she is and where she comes from. It's obviously going to be an emotional time for her, so just as long as there's supporting her like that, that'd be great.
I just wish we could have one big family. I really do. I wish there was a way that we could all meet up and we could just be a family, even if I don't get called mum.
Thank you. And it's clear from the way they're talking as well, the impact, they recognise the impact of this on adoptive family too. I know in my, when I came to seek out my birth family, my adoptive mum, in fact, she encouraged me to do it because she could see that I was in such a state that she kind of realised that that would be a good thing for me to do. And I'm ever so grateful for that, really. That allowed me to it gave me permission and it allowed me to access that support and all that kind of thing. So, you know, ideally that is what would happen here. So our last little bit today, we're going to just talk briefly about reunion. Shall I turn to you, Jenny? Would you like to just talk a little bit about that, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. And I'll keep it brief because I know we're running out of time a bit.
That's okay. Don't cut yourself off too much, Jenny. We want to hear what you've got to say.
Obviously, in my experience with my particular reunion, it was great. And I now have an ongoing connection and close relationship with my first son. He is part of our family now in lots of ways, and I can't see that changing, at least, you know, for quite a long time, and it's made me smile a lot. So that's been great. The lesson I've sort of taken from my own experience is that it's so easy to think that the actual reconnection, the reunion, is the end of the story. In fact, it's the beginning of the next stage of the story. And it's easy to assume that it's all going to be lovely and magic and, as I said, rainbows and unicorns. That's not necessarily the case. And I was thinking about this earlier. Where two people who are related by birth reconnect, they bring with them their own family. And up to that point, that family system in each of those, you know, before they sort of knew that the process of intermediarying and reconnection was going to happen, they had their, you know, we all had our own little family units and we were going on as usual. Suddenly there's this collision. I thought about it, and I've used that word advisedly. There's a collision of two families, which is not just the two people who are already prepared and expecting it and absolutely thrilled about it, but what about the families that come in their wake, that they bring with them into that new unit, which is the new birth relationship unit. And certainly for me, I made a lot of assumptions which were blown apart because it's been not straightforward. I won't go into detail hugely, but it's not been straightforward for some members of some of the family. So what happens is if things move in fits and starts, well, they certainly have for me. So you can't expect it all to be, you know, brilliant and yellow brick road from there. It's very much fits and starts, very much treading on eggshells sometimes, but always keeping in mind what it must feel like for those other people in the family. It's not just about the two closest, it's about the others. And in order for that really closest relationship to work, the others need to be encouraged and gently held, if you like, supported to come along too. And they will all do it at different paces. So all I will say, it's not necessarily straightforward. There's an impact on the wider family. You can't assume anything about that. And again, expectations need to be managed very carefully. And it's been a really, really useful journey. And we've talked about, myself and my eldest son have talked about this. He's very aware of it too. And as I say, we're part of each other's families, but in different ways. And it's ongoing. And it will resolve. It will resolve. But yeah,
it is complicated. There's no two ways about it.
It's very complicated, and that's the bit I hadn't learnt before.
Yeah, Sharon.
I'm not sure I've got anything useful to add.
Well, I'll add something
I think
there.
I think been very clear.
Yeah, I mean, it is really complicated joining another family. So I've sometimes reflected that as an adopted person, I did that when I was adopted, and then I did it again when I had a reunion with my birth family, and it's a hard thing to do. My other reflection about reunion really is that, and I say this to people that I work with, is that emotions will come out of some of places you don't even know where they're coming from. And you'll get hit with things that you don't understand. And it's kind of like that. I mean, I guess because most of us were adopted very young or quite young, a lot of it is pre-verbal memory, but it's not cellular memory and all that kind of thing. So it's just a really emotional thing, but not recognizable in any sort of normal sense. Normally, you know why you feel a bit wobbly, but actually you don't necessarily understand why you feel wobbly. And that's quite disturbing. And again, is something why, you know, that we really deal with as intermediaries and try and support people with. The other one is, obviously, it goes without saying that not all intermediaries are successful in terms of contact coming through. You know, a lot of birth mums from Jenny's generation were told to go away and never talk about it again. And that's exactly what they did. So they didn't talk to their subsequent partners or children. And to open that up then becomes too difficult. And that, I would say, is, you know, happens. And then on the other side, some adopted people really don't want to know. And they just don't want to know. And that's entirely valid and their own sorts of decisions. So we can never tell. And as Sharon's already said, a lot of the work is about guiding people's expectations and supporting them through that, so that it doesn't actually, you know, they don't believe it's all going to be long lost family, because it's not. They're not going to necessarily walk up along hand in hand down the beach kind of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add is that we do encourage people, as I think Jenny mentioned earlier, about the fact that, you know, yes, the walk down the beach hand in hand might not be the only successful outcomes. There are successful outcomes when people learn information, even if they never actually meet a person. There are successful outcomes where people, you know, might just receive a photograph and that can feel enough. There are successful outcomes where people simply exchange letters and it never moves on from there. And we always speak to anyone receiving a service from us about the fact that all of those would be considered successful in some way, and trying to get people to understand that, you know, there are different ranges of what we can consider to be successful.
And just quickly to add to that, there are successes that can happen later, because you can have a big gap between the initial attempts and it maybe not come to anything, and then actually months or years later something can be picked up and the process restarts.
Yeah, timing is everything in this thing, isn't it? Timing is absolutely everything. I think before we finish, we just had one last piece of video, and this is Zara Phillips, who's quite a prominent speaker on adoption, adopted person, and she's going to be talking about grief and reunion. So if you could play that clip, Jin, and this is her talking about grief and reunion.
I think that that's the least understood piece, and the piece that we're not allowed to express. So where does that go? You know, when you think of a child, if you meet somebody and a child's lost their parents through death, we naturally would say, oh my God, that must have been so hard for you. But as adoptees, we're never told that. We're just told, how great, oh wow, you were chosen, you know, all the stuff. But I didn't feel chosen. So it took me many years to understand how grief has played a part, because I repressed it for so long. But it would come out in my adult life. So the first was I reunited with my birth mother when I was 24. Took time, you know, back then we didn't have computers, and it was up to Catherine House looking in the birth records, and I found my birth mother not living in London. And I didn't understand then that actually the grieving process starts the moment we start searching. Whether we reunite or not, it's just the act of searching that re-triggers those feelings. And what I've learned over the years, I've read a lot. I'm not, you know, trained in anything, but I've read a lot. I've been to loads of conferences in America and listened to a lot of speakers, and I've learned babies remember everything. Babies know everything. Cellular memory are memories before there were words that stay in our bodies. Because when we're babies, we have no words, but they stay in our bodies. And as a mother of 3 children, my babies knew, I knew my babies, and my babies knew what was going on. I can absolutely tell you that. So a lot of the time, the feeling is, you know, the uncomfortable stuff in the body. But there's no words, so it would come out in rage and screaming and, you know, whatever I did, throwing bricks and, you know, just being a bit of a, you know, what's the word, obnoxious teenager. And when I met my birth mother and I wasn't using drugs and alcohol, I would literally leave her house. She was living in Surrey in Weybridge, and I would drive back, and this howl began to come out of me. Something I had never experienced before, but I knew it was familiar. I'm like, I know this. And I would have to pull over on the side of the road. I never wanted people to see me in that place. And oh my God. And it was literally like a baby screaming, howling. And that went on for a long time. And I didn't tell my adopted parents I'd met her. And I didn't understand. I was not going to groups like this. There was NORCAP in England at the time. But I wasn't able to really tell you what was going on with me. Maybe I was a little ashamed to say, oh, I've spent the last few hours howling. But I knew it was something, and I was, even though I was young and emotionally young, I was beginning to understand this is grief. This is the loss that I've probably felt my whole childhood, and nobody ever sat down and said to me, let's think about how sad this is.
Thank you. Very eloquently put, I think. So before we go, a couple of things. The recording of this will be on the PAC-UK YouTube channel in the next couple of days or early next week. You will only appear on it, just in case you had your camera on, you won't appear on it, so don't be worried about that. But please, you know, spread it around and get people to listen to this. If you work in an adoption agency or anything like it, ask them what they do about intermediary, ask them what's supposed to happen to people who want to reconnect with their families and there isn't any funding for, because I think that's a pretty good question. And finally, I just really so want to thank Jenny for her very powerful personal testimony, and Sharon, who's just been fabulous in the service, and for her really thoughtful perceptions about it all, and to my colleagues at PAC-UK who've been working in the background on this event. So thank you all ever so much for coming, and the website address is FamilyConnect. If you Google FamilyConnect, we were meant to have a nice slide to put up at the end, but I'm afraid we didn't supply that to Jin. So Google FamilyConnect, go there, lots of useful information, and that would be the way to find yourself an intermediary service. So give that a Google. All right, thanks very much, everybody, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.